Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's shatter some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to share today concerns Christians and taking over America. There's a certain idea out there that some people have that Christians want to take over America. The Christians want to set up a theocracy and dominate. So let's tackle this. Is this true? And if so, how much is it true? You know, some of the recent discussions people have had on what's been called Christian nationalism fits into this narrative that Christians want to take over America. You know, Christian nationalism is this merging, this fusion of Christianity and civic and political society. And you can't help but notice that Christian nationalism is everywhere. People are talking about it in academia and outside of academia. And it fits into this notion that Christians are going to take over our society. Now, I've critiqued the Christian nationalism scale in another video, and I've also argued that the way we define Christian nationalism is not consistent, and so it becomes whatever people want it to become. So I have problems with the Christian nationalism narrative, but it feeds into this sort of idea that what Christians want to do is take over society, and that's what I want to deal with. Now, let's just be honest. There are Christians that want to take over society. Let's not kid ourselves about that. Some Christians feel that society is better if Christians have taken over. I'm actually doing some work on this. In my study of identity politics, when I look at Christians' identity politics, this sentiment is pretty strong. So anyone who says that, well, that's false, no Christians want to take over society, that's not true. We can be honest about that, can't we? The question is this a large percentage of Christians, a significant percentage of Christians, or are these outliers? And to understand that, I looked at some data on just how active the average Christian is in politics. Now, when people think about this, they're thinking about conservative Christians, right? They're looking at conservative Christians. Are they trying to take over society? So when we look at conservative Christians, what we find out is that they are no more active in politics than your average person. In fact, they could even be less active, your average conservative Christian, in politics than your average person. I'm going to put in the description a link to some of this data now, so you can confirm for yourself that by and large, conservative Christians are not that politically active. And that doesn't surprise me because, you see, there's a tradition in conservative Christianity about how the political realm is secular and how we Christians should be concentrating on the spiritual. And in fact, it really wasn't until about the 1970s when the moral majority became very popular that you saw much of an attempt by conservative Christians to really get involved in the political world. Now, this is not to say that there aren't those, once again, who are very active and may have plans of trying to take over society. There are those. But your average conservative Christian is no more likely to engage in politics than the average person, which means that as a group, conservative Christians are no more likely to be trying to take over society than anyone else. You see, here's one of the problems with this myth that Christians want to take over society, is that yes, some do, but look at any group that's activists. They want to take over society. Let's not pretend games. Feminists, to a certain degree, want to take over society. People in the LGBT community, to a certain degree, want to take over society. People who are engaged in anti-racism want to take over society. Libertarians, to a certain degree, want to take over society. In that, all these groups want to push their values and think society should have their values instead of the current values they have. Now, as long as you're engaged in the political process, as long as you're trying to elect people and you're advocating for your ideas, in a democracy, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with trying to put your values forward and hope that your values will win the day. Nothing wrong with that for any of these groups. We can disagree on those values. We can say no or yes to their values. Yes, that's appropriate. But the fact that they're pushing their values, does that mean they're doing something evil? Neither. Is the fact that Christians are pushing their values means that they're doing something evil. If you want to disagree with those values, of course you can do that. That's your right to do that. But then to move that into say, see these Christians, these Christian nationalists, these people who are into the dominion theology, they want to take over society. Well, you're really not being fair. Let's hold Christians to the same standards we hold everyone else. And if we do, I think we're going to find out that per capita, we consider Christians are no more wanting to take over society than anyone else. Now, I want to make something pretty clear. I do think that some conservative Christians go overboard, and some conservative Christians have to be reined in, and they should be reined in by us fellow Christians. That's all fair. But some individuals, the way they approach the argument about Christians taking over society is to imply that Christians should not engage in politics. And I agree that spiritual matters are more important than political matters. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in political matters. And I am critical of Christians who seek to equate Christianity with conservative politics. Okay? However, we as Christians have just as much of a right to engage in politics as anyone else. And so while I will critique other Christians, and I likely will in some of my videos, who I think overly engage in politics, I do not walk away from the fact that we Christians have just as much right to engage in politics as anyone else. So, that being said, I can state it is a myth that Christians have this unique desire to take over society, to control others. Some do. As a group, we're no more likely than anyone else. And we retain the right to engage in the political realm. We live in this society too. And since we live in this society, we have a right to have a say in how the society is run. We don't have the right to be the only group with a say, but we deserve to have a say. And I'm willing to fight for Christians to have that say. And one of the ways of fighting for that is to push back against this myth. Please engage with our ideas. Don't engage in such myths. Does this shatter some paradigms for you? A paradigm of thinking that Christians are trying to set up some sort of Salem witch hunt, some sort of theocracy. Well, I hope it helps us to rethink more carefully about throwing around such myths. They can be quite damaging as well as untruthful. If this is something that you enjoy talking about, if this is something you want to enjoy engaging in, then please consider subscribing to this channel. If you enjoy this talk, please like the talk. If you don't enjoy this talk, comment. If you enjoy the talk, comment. I enjoy this engagement and it helps to get the message out there. Thanks, and come back again where we can shatter some more paradigms.